Aloha, and welcome back to the Healing Laughter Podcast, the show where we talk about all things narcissistic abuse. I'm your host, Katie Utterback. I'm a certified narcissistic abuse recovery coach at Elevated Aura, an international holistic coaching firm specializing in helping survivors of toxic relationships learn self-love and how to live their best life. Okay, let's talk about what's going on with Britney Spears and her family. On June 23rd, 2021, Britney Spears testified in a hearing related to her conservatorship. Essentially, Britney said that her family has been abusing her for years, emotionally, financially, physically, and in a way, sexually. Now, I said in a way sexually because at one point during the hearing, Britney said that what happened to her is called sex trafficking in the state of California. So that's why I'm putting it in there. It's her words. It's not up for me to decide what kind of abuse she experienced. Now, just a little background, if you've been following the Free Britney case or movement, but maybe you're still a little bit fuzzy on some of the details. So Britney's father, Jamie, has been her conservator since around 2007, 2008. Now, if you remember, around that time, this is when all of those images of a freshly bald-headed Britney smashing a paparazzi's car window with an umbrella were like everywhere. It was reported in the Framing Britney documentary that was put out by the New York Times that it was this particular incident that prompted Britney's dad, Jamie, to check Britney involuntarily into a mental health ward for observation. Now, all of that testing and evaluation of Britney allegedly resulted in an emergency court hearing that left Jamie Spears in charge of Britney's life, like every single aspect of it. Now, in hindsight, medical professionals believe that Britney was just really overwhelmed in 2007 and 2008 and not exactly going through some sort of mental health breakdown. It was in this time when Britney had just had her second child with Kevin Federline, and K-Fed was filing for divorce from Britney, and he was asking for full custody of he and Britney's two children. Now, Britney had these kids back to back. I believe the term that we use in pop culture is Irish twins. Like, these kids are like 9 months apart. So as soon as Britney's body was able to get pregnant again, she did. And it's highly believed that she was really struggling with postpartum depression. Now, that's hard. Like, having a baby is hard on your body. And it's not just hard on your body, it's emotionally exhausting. I'm saying this and I don't have kids yet. Well, at least not the human variety. So my dog looked at me when I said that. So Britney had a lot going on in her life. Her marriage was ending. She had 2 very small babies, and her hormones were not in balance. That's a lot. And on top of that, most of us have these periods in our life. They're called the dark night of the soul, when we're facing all of our demons. Now, if you're familiar with astrology or human design, the dark night of the soul is a human experience that we all go through, actually multiple times in our lives. One of the biggest dark nights of the soul experiences usually happens around your 30th birthday. I think it's around ages 27 to 32 is when it can happen. Because if you study energy like I do, you know that energy is like the infinity symbol. It's an ebb and a flow. What you put out, what you say about yourself, what you focus on is what you attract. However, energy sometimes comes in to help us become what we were destined to be. It forces us to grow and expand, to learn life lessons so that we can better show up as our true, authentic selves. Now, my dark night of the soul started when I was 28, and that's really when I started figuring out that I had been narcissistically abused. And back in 2007, 2008, that's when Britney was around 26, 27 years old, which makes it highly likely, energetically speaking, that she was destined to go through this hardship. Now, that does not excuse on any level how the media treated Britney, how the entertainment industry treated Britney, how her family treated Britney, or really anyone else. Because collectively, we fucked up. And we hurt someone who had brought so much light and happiness and music and a love of dance into so many of our lives. For the record, I don't know Britney personally. I don't know anyone who knows her personally, but I feel like I grew up with her in a way. So there is this kind of almost like sacred mentorship or friendship. I do feel protective over Britney, especially since the more I learn about what kind of life she's been living, how she's been treated, You can't help but see her as this very vulnerable, fragile girl who's been through so much. It makes sense as to why she didn't know who to trust and why she believed if she came forward with her story that she would just be laughed at and mocked. I felt that same way when I first started sharing my own experience with narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse, and estrangement. Listening to Britney say that she was afraid she was going to be made fun of for being in a conservatorship or being abused hit me hard. Here was this girl, this woman who I had put on a pedestal my whole life as an example of what I should strive to look like, act like, be like. And here she was saying she was miserable, that she wanted to live her own life, not this one that she was forced to live due to contracts in an abusive family. I'm kind of actually getting emotional thinking about that. While Britney's dad may have been her conservator for more than 10 years, controlling who she could become friends with and where and when she could see them, who she could date, when and where she could see her kids, how much she could spend on travel, even what color she could paint her kitchen cabinets, and there's so much more. Through all of that, Britney has been silently working to remove Jamie from her conservatorship for years. Years. And for years, she really hasn't had much luck. But last fall, Britney's luck started to change. The court removed Jamie from her conservatorship and scheduled additional hearings to see if the conservatorship was actually needed. Britney has been arguing for years that most people placed in a conservatorship do so because there's a real concern that they are not mentally sound and may harm themselves by possibly donating too much money. They may be taken advantage of by the wrong people. The thing is, conservatorships are largely designed for older people with conditions like dementia, Alzheimer's, and other debilitating mental health and cognitive disorders. Conservatorships are not designed for international pop stars who are touring around the world or who have a residency in Las Vegas. They're not designed for individuals who are training their own dancers on what the choreography is for a 90-minute performance. When Britney testified in court on June 23rd, she said she believed 1,000% that her father, Jamie, loved exercising this control over her, telling her that she's not allowed to remove an IUD from her own body, telling her she's not allowed to get married to her boyfriend, and she's not allowed to have another child. Britney is now 39 years old, and her ability to have a child naturally decreases every minute, not because of her mental health, but because of her biological clock. Now, can you imagine wanting a child with someone you love, but your father, your mother, your siblings are telling you that you're not mentally stable enough to have a child, that you are not mentally stable enough to decide for yourself if the person that you love is actually good enough for you to have a kid with or to marry? Yet these same people are paying themselves thousands of dollars every month for, like, quote, handling you. That's an emotional torture. These same people who are telling Britney that she was not allowed to get her hair or her nails done, but the nurses who came to her house and watched her change naked, the people who took the doors off of her room, allowing her zero privacy, like, how can, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. These nurses showed up every week with new nails, different hairstyles, and Britney now is feeling unsure of who to trust and likely doubting her own sanity because this is gaslighting. It's a horrible form of emotional abuse that really makes someone question their sanity. And the thing with gaslighting is it may start off small. Britney may have wondered if these women were painting their own nails or if they knew someone who was able to do their nails for them. But this likely expanded to other aspects of her life. I know it did for me. When someone would say something like, "Oh, you don't remember having a drink with this person?" or saying this, I would go into a panic. Was I an alcoholic? Did I drink more than I thought I did? Why do I not remember this? Did I say or do something I shouldn't have? Is this why I struggle to make lasting friendships? Do I do weird things and black out when I drink? When Britney said that she wanted to be able to sue her family, I wanted to applaud her. I felt similarly, and I still kind of do. And that's because it's one thing, for there to be one person in your family that is mean and harsh. But when everyone around you starts making excuses for that person and they try to paint you as being mentally unstable when you bring up this unacceptable behavior or these boundary violations, it cuts deep. Like I said in the first 2 episodes of my story, my experience with narcissistic abuse, episodes 1 and 2 of the show, I originally thought that the issue was between my sister and my husband. And then my parents started defending my sister's rude treatment of my husband. They defended her berating me, and they did so by trying to gaslight me. Only it didn't work this time. I separated myself just to get some space, some perspective, and I kept what was going on to myself. I didn't involve my other siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles. But guess what? My sister and my parents did. So by the time I was ready to share or confide in my brother as to how low I felt because something happened that I never expected, never imagined. And his response to me was that I was mentally unwell, that my husband was abusing me. And he said this while saying that he had my best interest in mind, that he was my brother and his job was to look out for his sister. Gaslighting. Now, one person that fans of Britney have been looking to for some guidance, some reassurance that Britney's doing better than the conservatorship hearings would lead one to believe, is Britney's sister, Jamie Lynn. And that's because, like Britney, Jamie Lynn was someone that many girls my age aspired to be like when she was the star of the show Zoe 101. Jamie Lynn may have started out as Britney's little sister, but she started doing her own thing, and it was so fucking cool to see 2 sisters support one another and support one another's work, even though it was so different from what one another was doing. Like Britney, I have, or I should say had, a little sister, and unfortunately, also like Britney, both of our sisters are abusers. When I was growing up, I was almost always getting yelled at, scratched, punched, yelled at, and taunted by my little sister. She was very thin, and I was not, which I think made it difficult for people to believe that she was the bully and I was her target. And because my sister almost died when she was born, my parents have often made excuses for her, and I think in some ways held her in higher regard. Like they almost lost her, so they'll do anything and everything for her. Now, I know it may sound like I'm jumping to conclusions, but this is actually something that my brother told me to my face. He said the reason he even started having a relationship with me when I was younger was because he realized that when our sister almost died, that life was fragile. So suddenly in his eyes, I guess it didn't matter that I wasn't the brother that he always wanted. I was alive and he wanted to spend time with me while he could. Sometimes I do wonder if my sister would have turned out differently, less of a bully maybe, if people had not just made excuses for her entire life. Because the truth is, she's an adult and a teacher. She should know more than most people how to be kind, how to support one another, especially when we have different ideas, different body shapes and sizes. But that's not my sister. My sister cares more about herself, the perception that people have of her, than she does about living her own life as a true, authentic person. And so does Jamie Lynn. For years, the Free Britney movement has tried to get Jamie Lynn to vocally and publicly support Britney, to fight for Britney's freedom, autonomy, and rights, whether or not she has mental health issues or not. But she didn't. In fact, Jamie Lynn's been doing the opposite. Jamie Lynn has silently been overseeing Britney's finances along with their father. She's even been appointed to handle the trust that was created for Britney's 2 sons with Kevin Federline. And after Britney essentially blasted the entire family for failing to support her or listen to her wishes, her personal boundaries, physical boundaries, privacy boundaries, everything, Jamie Lynn went crying to the internet. While I do believe that people make mistakes, I also believe that an abuser will ignore you 100 times and only cry or try to make amends when they believe there's an audience. This is how emotional abuse and gaslighting works. It's subtle and it's predominantly done in private. And that's how targets of abuse end up stuck in these toxic, emotionally abusive relationships. You start to believe that you are the problem because everyone around you is saying how wonderful and nice and supportive your abuser is. But that's because they don't see the shit that happens behind closed doors. They don't know the subtleties of what is going to hurt you the way that your abuser does. Because narcissists, these emotional vampires, they just love to study their target of supply. Just like in Frozen, the Disney movie, when Princess Anna meets Prince Hans, Hans mirrors Anna saying things like, "You like sandwiches? I like sandwiches." I don't really remember any example beyond that, but it goes on for quite a while. So Hans essentially tries to become this perfect match with Anna so that she looks over every red flag and the positive bonding chemicals can be released. And that's how Hans essentially gains access to the castle and almost kills Elsa and Anna. He wasn't there for love, it was greed. The same is true for abusive, toxic siblings. They study us. They know what makes us happy. They know what makes us feel insecure, vulnerable, confident, and they mess with us using that information. Jamie Lynn kept saying that it's hard for someone in your family, or it's hard when someone in your family is struggling with their mental health. And she said she didn't know what to do because she's just Britney's sister. Well, in that case, I want to know, why is Jamie Lynn monitoring Britney's kids' trust if she's just a sister or just an aunt? I can't help but believe that Jamie Lynn's response to Britney's testimony, not just some internet rant, is how most siblings raised in a narcissistic family of origin would respond. I know it's how my siblings would likely respond. For example, Jamie Lynn only responded publicly to the allegations of abuse when her ass was on the line. In other words, she was named by Britney as one of Britney's abusers, and then the internet started demanding that the Zoe 101 reboot be canceled for her lack of concern for Britney. Second of all, Jamie Lynn's response was basically her fake crying and saying, "I didn't know better," like 12 different ways. It's possible that Jamie Lynn didn't know what to do the first few times that her sister shared with her that she felt that their dad was taking advantage of her. I know that I struggled when I was growing up, hearing from my older siblings that my mom was abusive. And when I got older, they started saying that my dad was abusive too because he made my brother enlist in the military. I didn't exactly agree with that conclusion, but I also didn't know what to do because at this point in time, my brother had been out of the military for like 10 years and was married with a kid. And he wasn't even the one complaining about this. So I really didn't know what I could have done anyway. But the point I'm trying to make here is that it's been more than a decade of Britney saying she needed help, that she was being abused, taken advantage of, and essentially tortured. So one question that's come to my mind after hearing all of this testimony: why is it that people only seem to feel comfortable speaking up when there's an abusive romantic partner harming a loved one or their friend? Why are people so afraid to speak up if someone's parent is harming their sibling or their loved one, or if another sibling is harming a sibling or a friend or your spouse? If anyone comes to you and shares that they don't feel like their parent, their sibling, their teacher, boss, friend has their best interest in mind, don't just ignore that shit. One reason that I made the decision to go no contact with my entire family of origin is that I studied how narcissism takes a hold on families for generations. I'm going to explain what I mean using my own family of origin as an example. So my mother was molested by her father, and my mother excused her father's abuse because her father told her that he was abused by his mother and watched his father abuse his mother. So when I was growing up, my mother and several of my aunts would openly talk about how they didn't understand what their mom was doing with their dad and why all of their dad's brothers were such monsters who married such sweet ladies. So knowing all of this, I would make excuses for my mom's behavior. I would let things slide because I felt bad for her. I felt sorry that she really didn't have someone who seemed to unconditionally love her. So in a sense, I tried to be her cheerleader. I believed that our close connection was unbreakable. But when my sister threw me out of her house and my mom started gaslighting me and was making really hurtful comments, I started questioning how close we really were. Because in my mind, if you were close to someone and they said that, you're hurting me or I didn't like this, you would stop. You wouldn't just dig your heels in and keep going. So I told my mom my list of complaints, and I even tried to educate her about narcissism. I think I straight up said, like, your parents were narcissists, and her response shocked me. Just two simple letters, one word. So I was taken aback when I heard this because I wasn't sure if she knew what narcissism was, if she was just saying so, and if she understood narcissism as a personality disorder and not someone who's like overly confident. Then I learned about idiot compassion. By allowing my mother to violate my boundaries because of the abuse, the tough life she had endured, I was essentially teaching my mother that it was okay to violate my boundaries and to not separate her life from my own. And even more than that, I learned that it's a combination of idiot compassion and excusing bad behaviors as, well, that's just how that person is, in our family units that allows trauma to be passed from generation to generation. So in other words, a narcissistic family unit, when the narcissistic parent dies, one of the children, one of the siblings, usually steps up and becomes the new principal abuser, so the new narc in chief. For me, this meant that even if my parents were the narcissists and not my siblings, so even if it was my siblings were not actually narcissists, they just had traits of, there was a really high possibility that one of my siblings would become the narcissist when my mom or dad dies. And when that happens, the target of abuse doesn't change. So since that was me, I was the scapegoat, the target of abuse. If I were to go back to my family of origin, even after my narcissistic parent dies, the abuse would likely continue at the request of my siblings. And that's why in narcissistic families or toxic families, there's often one aunt or cousin that gets it and stays away from everyone else. The truth of the matter is, if I look at my family of origin, my mom mentioned having an aunt that separated from everyone else. My dad's brother separated from everyone else. So I definitely know that there's generational trauma that I'm working with. And in the Spears family, the truth teller, the scapegoat, appears to be Britney. And this is why neither Jamie Lynn nor Britney's brother Brian have been any help to Britney. Britney's siblings are staying in their lane. They're playing their family role, hoping that by not upsetting mom or dad, possibly both, that they can get a piece of Britney's money pie. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to share 3 tips if you have a sibling or a friend come to you and express concern about how their parent or another sibling may be treating them. So, number 1, offer to be a safe space for this person if you are mentally able to do so. I say if you're mentally able to do so because not everyone has the mental or emotional capacity to hear another person's story or experience and put aside their own experiences and opinions. Being a safe space is not necessarily about you, it's about creating an environment where someone can share really difficult things. Now, if you're not sure if you can handle hearing what someone's going through, offer to support them in other ways. Don't let them share everything with you and then say that you're overwhelmed or you think that they're overthinking it. So be upfront if you cannot hold that space for that person. They're going to appreciate that in the end. Tip number 2, if someone comes to you and says, I feel like my parent doesn't have my best interest in mind, I feel like my sibling doesn't have my best interest in mind, do not run back to that person and tell them what was confided to you. This is not just a boundary violation. It's a violation of that safe space, that sacred agreement that you created when that target of abuse came to you. It's also predatory behavior to go and run to someone's abuser. If you are truly worried about someone's mental health, get them professional help. Connect them with a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. Connect them with a trauma therapist or call a mental health support line. And then the third and final tip, validate their emotions. Now, validating emotions doesn't mean that you agree with how someone is feeling, but you acknowledge that you understand that they're feeling that way. You acknowledge that you heard them say that they're feeling that way, and you allow them to feel that way. You don't talk them out of it. Because the truth is, we can't always help how we feel. Sometimes our feelings are just that, feelings. Sometimes they guide us and let us know something feels awesome. Other times they fire off warning signs, letting us know that we're angry because someone violated our boundaries, or we're sad, we're anxious, whatever. Now, feelings come and go, so please don't get overly attached to how you're feeling at any one particular moment. And to Britney, I'm so sorry for my involvement in your pain, for buying magazines with your face on them, hoping to learn more about what was going on with your life. I didn't intend to harm you with my actions, but clearly I did. And to abusers like Jamie Lynn, who use crocodile tears to try and paint themselves as victims, I see you, and my God, I know karma does too. That's our show today. And remember, you deserve healing from narcissistic abuse because you are fucking worth it. And I love you. If you have any questions about narcissistic abuse or the recovery journey that you would like to have answered on the show, please send an email to katie@elevatedaura.com or submit a voice message on the Healing Laughter Anchor podcast homepage. For any other questions, please visit elevatedaura.com.